We're in 21:3 of John. We have the gathering of the apostles here. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We'll come with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. I don't know if you've noticed, but in all the stories about these fishermen, they never catch anything. Okay? It's, I think, a lucky break they became apostles. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. Now, this is the first apparition we've recorded in Galilee. Remember I told you there were Jerusalem apparitions and Galilee apparitions. This is the first of the apparitions we see in Galilee. So the disciples, again, don't recognize Jesus. As we mentioned, we have the thing of not recognizing him. Incidentally, the way they fish, the particular fish they go after there today is called the Peter fish. But it's a kind of carp, and it's very good, but it's extremely bony. And anyway, they normally fish for them at night using lights. And the two things you might notice if you ever go to Israel is at night, if you look over the Sea of Galilee, you'll see these lights out there. And that's the fishermen who are fishing for this particular fish. The other thing you might notice is the size of the boats. The boats are unusually large for a lake you can see clear around. And it's because they get very, very violent seas. And I think you know that, wind is a function of temperature. It's temperature that creates wind. And the worst winds are always on deserts, because there you get the most violent change between day and night. You know, it's not unusual to be on a desert and have it in the low hundreds during the day and have it freeze at night. That is not unusual in a desert. And there's nothing to hold the heat or anything, so it goes and comes and goes and comes. But anyway, as the winds come off the Judean desert, they come down the hill and they go literally under the Sea of Galilee, and it boils like water. And you remember that a couple of times the apostles will be out there when the seas get really rough? Now, I think you need to know, a fisherman is smart enough to look at the skies and know when a storm is coming. The thing is, it has nothing to do with the storm. It has to do with the winds way up on the desert that come in. One of the strange things about being in Israel is it is almost impossible to predict things that happen because they happen at great distance. I'll give you another example. We went down to visit the Dead Sea one day, and the day before us, a Volkswagen with 7 people in it was swept into the Dead Sea, and they all died. And the reason is they have flash floods. But the flash floods, remember, it's the lowest place on earth. The flash floods can well be from a rain that's over 150 miles away. And because the desert doesn't absorb water, the water rushes across the desert in about a 7-foot wave and just comes down the hill and takes everything off. If you ever go to Israel and you go with a professional guide, you'll notice a professional guide will always have the radio on. Always. And the reason is that will tell them if it's raining somewhere, and they'll know there could be a flash flood in a different place. Okay? And also, if you go to the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, you notice the road undulates like this. It does so you can stop at high points when there's the flood. Okay? Enough tourist information. 5. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." Notice he will call them children. I'd like you to know that they probably called him father. In Jewish law, in order to be a parent, what you need to do is teach a child God's law and how to earn a living. Every parent is required to do that. And I always like to use the example of Dennis the Menace. Now, if you study Dennis the Menace, His father, Mr. Mitchell, you know, he doesn't really relate to his father at all. It's always Mr. Wilson next door. Everything he learns, he gets from Mr. Wilson, everything. Well, the fact of the matter is, under Jewish law, Mr. Mitchell is not his father. Under Jewish law, Mr. Wilson is his father. I'm sure he'd be depressed to find out, but that's the way the law works. What happens is, if you teach someone God's law and the way to earn a living, you become their father. Fatherhood has nothing to do with generation. It has to do with whether you parent a child, not if you generate the child. Okay? Now, as a result of this, every rabbi was called father. And that's how that came into the Catholic tradition. Because the early Catholics were all Jews, they called the clergy father. And the reason you called them father was because the clergy was the one who taught you God's law. So under Jewish law, you are the father. So they called you father. And under Jewish law, we are the children of people who teach us God's law. So under the law, Jesus was father and they were children. That's under simple Jewish law. So he says, children, have you caught anything? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net over the right side of the boat and you'll find something. So they cast it and they were not able to pull it in because of the number of fish. Okay? Remember I told you as fishermen it's unusual that they never caught anything? It's also unusual to me that they accepted advice from a carpenter. Okay? And it's always right. So anyway, they pull in all these fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. This is poorly worded. Fishermen usually fished naked. And the reason they fished naked, it was just easier than getting everything wet. And so what Peter is not going to do is go on the shore naked. So what Peter does is put on some clothes and jump in the water. Although you say that in English, he put on his clothes and jumped in the water. It just doesn't sound right. So they always find a way to get around the text. I'd like you to notice something here. It tells us the disciple whom Jesus loved. It's very clear in the scriptures that the disciple that Jesus felt closest to was John. And John is also often called the beloved disciple. Isn't it interesting that Jesus did not make John head of the apostles when it was the one that Jesus loved most? And the reason is right here in this text. When they realize it's Jesus, who jumps in the water? So while Jesus loved John the best, the apostle who loved Jesus the best was Peter. And so who should head the church? The one who loves Jesus the most. Not the one Jesus loves most. The one who loves Jesus the most should head the church. So ultimately, Simon Peter will be chosen for that. Okay? The other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from shore, only 100 yards, dragging the net with the fish. See, they can't even get that net into the boat. There is so much fish, so they drag the net as they come. When they climbed out on shore, they saw a charcoal fire with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you just caught. Okay? So when they arrive, there's fish and there's bread, which essentially is their breakfast. They normally drink water. On really big occasions, they drink water with a little wine in it. Okay? But that's basically what they drink. Passover, they would actually drink wine. But other than that, they normally just had a little wine in water. And they would eat fish and bread was basically what they ate. So there's the meal. Simon Peter, bring some of the fish you've just caught. So Simon Peter went over and dragged the net ashore full of 153 large fish. If you'd like to know a mystery from the Bible, is the number 153. When you study Bible texts, numbers are usually rounded. 10, 50, 40 years in the desert. Did the Jews wander 40 years in the desert? Maybe. They could have wandered 50. They could have wandered 35. Okay? But you round it to 40. When you get an exact number like this, it must be a real number of something. but we have no idea. And you know, many numbers are symbolic. 70 means earthly perfection, 7 days in a week. Okay? That's in the Catholic Church why we have 7 sacraments. Do we have 7 sacraments? We have 9 sacraments. But in order to keep the magic number 7, we combine 3 of them under one, called holy orders. Deacon, priesthood, and bishop are 3 sacraments. But we want the magic number 7, so we put them in the plural, and the rest go, okay? The other thing has to do with heavenly perfection. The number for heavenly perfection is 12, and that's because there are 12 moons to a year. That's why there are 12 apostles, because the church will be perfect in heaven. That's why there are 12 tribes of Israel. That's why there are 144 elders, 12 Jews, 12 Christians. It's what will put us, in heaven. So you see, the numbers are very, very important. I'll give you a couple of, I'll give you one probably. The one that seems to have the highest possibility is that at the time the texts were written, there was 153 Christian communities on the face of the earth. And that's certainly a possibility, okay? So that might be the meaning of the number. But anyway, like for instance, if you're pulling out the fish, 150 is what you'd say if you just say there are a lot of fish. You'd say 150. But 153, there has to be a meaning to the number. And we just don't know what it is, okay? Even though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." And none of them asked, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. At this point now, they finally realize it's Jesus. Where did they realize this? Probably from the catch of fish. Do you remember John immediately recognized it? Why is this? Remember Jesus did this before? Remember they were out on the lake, they didn't catch anything, so throw your net there, and they caught it? John is the one who recognizes, aha, this is the way that Jesus identifies himself. So he identified Jesus immediately. One of the things I want you to notice about this, the first time Jesus had them catch the fish, I want you to know everything was fine in their lives, everything was good. So it was a catch of fish. At this point, only the one who remembered that was able to identify Jesus, which is John. It didn't occur to their memory that this is exactly what Jesus did last time. And the thing is, when Jesus operates in our lives, when things are going well, we tend not to remember it. Because if everything's going well, fine. We just don't pay much attention. But if we don't pay attention, we won't recognize him when times are bad. Because Jesus always acts the same way. Jesus acts in exactly the same way. And if you are very attentive to the way Jesus acts in your life when things are fine, you'll identify him immediately when there are problems. And that's very, very important, okay? Because that's when you need it. So, Jesus came over, took the bread, gave it to them, and in like manner the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus revealed himself to his disciples after being raised from the dead. First time was the night of Easter Sunday when Thomas was gone. Second time was next Sunday when Thomas was there. This is the 3rd time, okay? So the 3rd time he revealed to them. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Okay? This is a very complicated statement, and it has 2 special meanings. And both of them are true in Greek as well as in English. This is a Greek saying. Does this mean, Peter, do you love me more than any of the apostles love me? Or it can mean, do you love me more than you love any of the apostles? Okay? Now, as a matter of fact, he said, or do you love me more than any of these apostles love me? And so he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was distressed that he had said to him a third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. I'd like to notice a couple of things. The first thing, dealing with the animals. You notice it says, what is it? Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. Okay? In English, people develop lots of words for things that are important to them. Now, in the English language, we have many words for money. Dough, cash, silver. We have thousands of words for money in English, because what's most important to us is money. So we have lots of words for money. You have to know that for them, sheep were important. There are lots of words for sheep, but we can't translate them into English because we don't have that many words for sheep. What are the sheep? The first thing they mention are newborn lambs, okay, that are nursing. The second time they mention sheep, it is an adult sheep that is not nursing. And the third time they mention sheep, they're talking lead sheep. You know, anytime you have a herd animal, there's specific animals that go out in front. And so these are the lead sheep. Now, what does that translate into the church? It translates a very specific thing. When the nursing lambs are put under Peter's authority, that is all the people in the catechumenate. That's people preparing to be Christians. When we're told that he has authority over the sheep, that's all the believers, the baptized. And we're told he has authority over the lead animals, he is the highest bishop. So he's over the bishop, the believers, and the people studying to be believers. So it's a 3-level authority, okay? And that authority is given to Peter. Do you remember when Jesus said that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church? Do you notice that was all future tense? I will build my church. That was a promise. Peter wasn't given any authority there. Here he's given authority. It's authority over lambs, sheep, lead sheep. Now I'd like to deal with what he says to him. In Greek, there are 3 words for love. One is eros. It has to do with sexual love. One is philo, and it has to do with friendship. And the other is agape. And agape is a deep bonding relationship between people. And you can have agape with a wife, and you can have agape with a close friend. But agape is not something you have with many people ever. Agape is a very deep love. Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you agape me? And what Peter says is, yes, Lord, you know I philo you. Okay? And that's why Jesus turns again. He says, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, Lord, I philo you. And then Jesus says to him, Peter, do you philo me? And then Peter says, you know that I philo you, because he said this the 2 times. And then he gives him the thing. The thing I'd like you to notice, at this point in his life, Peter is not capable of agape. He would love to have that relationship with Jesus. Jesus would love to have that relationship with him, but he's just not capable of it. So rather than wait till Peter can reach agape, Jesus comes down to philo. And one of the things that I think oftentimes we look at some person and say they aren't very religious, like they're a Catholic who goes 2 times a year to church, Christmas and Easter, or 3 times in their life, which is when they're married, when they're baptized, and when they're buried, 2 times of which someone else is carrying them, okay? But the idea is that you have to be able to understand that God is able to relate to anyone's level of faith. Yeah. So if my faith is just I go to church 2 days a year, Jesus would love to have me a daily communicant, but he'll settle for 2 days a year, okay? And to be really important, one of the major things I'd like you to get out of all of this in what we're watching is to be non-judgmental. We all want to be better than we are, and that's what we should be doing. rather than trying to make someone else better than they are. Okay? We all want to be better than we are. And so I want to spend my life being a better, stronger believer. And to that degree, I hope to draw others into a relationship with Jesus. And there are only two things required, incidentally. Number one, you must have a powerful relationship with Jesus. And secondly, you have to enjoy it. You know, if people look at me and I'm a miserable Christian, they figure, what the heck, I can be miserable and rich. Why do I have to be miserable and poor? You know, there are lots of ways to be miserable. But if I have happiness, happiness is very rare in our world. If you're a happy person, you will draw people to what you have. That's what we're called to do. And allow that God will relate with anyone at any position. God is much more relaxed about this than you and I are. And he will draw them and just trust. So that's what he does. First guy to lead the church. He isn't capable of the highest love of Jesus. So Jesus takes what he can get. And over a period of time, Peter's faith will become so strong, he will one day die as a martyr. But not yet. Not yet. Amen, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to dress yourself and go where you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands. Someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Now we're going to go in to how this is interpreted by the author of the Bible, by the author of this text. But I'll tell you how I interpret this. I do not think this refers to the death of Peter. This refers to the coming of the Holy Spirit. That once the Holy Spirit comes to Peter, Peter's life will be possessed by someone beyond him. And he will go to Rome, a place he never wanted to go. He will do all these kinds of things. I think you know the Quo Vadis story. How many people know the Quo Vadis story? Okay, it's a legend. Okay, it's just a legend held in church tradition. But when the terrible persecutions began in Rome, Simon Peter, I would say wisely, left the city. Okay, so he's going out of the city. As he's going out of the city, he passes Jesus, and he recognizes him. And of course, you know, he warns Jesus. He says, you know, you don't want to go there. And Jesus says to him, well, where are you going? Quo vadis, where are you going? And Peter says, well, I'm getting out of the city. And then Jesus says to him, well, then I will go and die for my people again. Peter turns around and goes back to Rome because that's his job, to die. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but why a bishop wears red? A bishop wears red because if there's a persecution, he's supposed to be the first person in the diocese to die. The red is a symbol of blood. That's why they wear the color. Okay? They're supposed to be the very first to die. Okay? So anyway, so the author here believes this refers to the martyrdom of Simon Peter. He says he said this signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he said this, he said to Peter, follow me. Okay? So he says, they'll bind your hand. Then he says to Peter, follow me. Another thing to notice here, when you study Pentecostalism, particularly Pentecostalism in the United States, it's very common for Pentecostalism to talk about the moment of your decision for Christ. When you make this thing, this great thing, and how your life changes. In the Roman Catholic Church, we believe your decision for Christ has to actually be made every day. That the fact I made a decision for Christ, let's say 30 years ago or 40 years ago, will not suffice for today. The decision for Jesus is made each and every day. And so that's why when Jesus finishes the end of his life, do you notice he says to Simon Peter the very thing he said the first time he saw him? Follow me. Peter is invited to make his decision for Christ. Why? Everyone has to make it new every day. Okay? You know, it's a very interesting thing. I'm lucky in the parishes I've been in, are parishes where people live a long time in the parish. Today people move around a lot, you know, to different areas. But in the parish I was in Spreckles, we celebrated a 50th wedding anniversary at least once a month. And we did 2 60s and 170 while I was there. But you know, if a man and woman who have been married 50 years are capable of saying, I do. It's a very different thing than two people in their 20s saying, I do. It is a very different thing. Sounds the same, but the two people at a 50th wedding anniversary know exactly what they're saying yes to. Those two kids know diddly squat, okay? They know nothing, okay? And they say, I do. My mother always used to say, I do means a very different thing the other side of a mountain of diapers, okay? And that's a truth. But do you understand that's true of the relationship with Jesus? When I was a little boy, it's hard for me even to talk about it. The day I made First Communion was an amazing day in my life. We went through all our preparation. We got this little white outfit, we look like little saints. Those were the days. Anyway, so we came forward, we made First Communion and all that sort of thing. And communion is the basic Catholic act of faith. And so if everything I've been through in my life, I've been a priest, over 40 years. I'm over 70 years old. I come before God today. When I receive communion, I'm saying to Jesus Christ, I have lived this length of time, and I am still your man. And Jesus Christ looks at me through the host and says, I've gone with you through those years, and I am still your God. Amen. It is an unbelievable moment. And that is the come follow me. Every time you go to communion, it is more important than the last time because you know more about what's involved. And each time we go to communion, we know ourselves more. And the fact of types of things that have gone on in our lives, I think a lot of things that happen to us about sinfulness and stuff are very discouraging. And if you're like me, like when you go to the sacrament of reconciliation, it sounds remarkable like the last time you went. It's almost as though we're treading water and not making any progress at all. And sometimes you have the feeling, it's very discouraging. But something to understand, do you know that when Jesus called you, he knew all that? It may be a surprise to you, but it isn't to him. There is nothing in my life that would turn Jesus off at all because he saw it all before he called me. Now, things that happened in my life are a surprise to me. I'll tell you the two things that have most amazed me, and I think it's true of every person who's older if you look back. I am awed by the good I'm capable of. I had no idea the types of things I'd be willing to sacrifice for or what I'd be willing to give up for God. I had no idea what life would ask of me and my willingness to do it. It's an amazing thing. I am horrified by the depths of sin I have sunk into. I never thought I'd be capable of certain things and have committed sins. And I think the most amazing thing is when you look back on your life, the good you've done and the evil you've done. It's as though, we have no idea the evil or the good we're capable of. And we sort of work through this. But at the day Jesus called you, he knew the lowest you would ever sink and the highest you would ever rise. And knowing it perfectly, he called you. The only one who was stupid and didn't know it was you. But he knew when he called us. And so this thing of Peter, he says to him again, follow me, okay, to make the commitment. Peter turned and saw the disciple following whom Jesus loved, the one who'd also reclined on his chest during the supper and said, Master, who is the one who will betray you? Now this is the Apostle John. You remember, he reclined on the chest. Incidentally,